Hello, dear friends. Today we continue our acquaintance with the memoirs of Waffen SS Major General Kurt Meyer. Don't forget to rate the video and leave your opinion about this material. Well, let's begin. We received a radio message that we would be relieved by the 3rd Battalion of the 1st SS Infantry Regiment, which was due to arrive at noon. Just as we were about to return to the battalion headquarters, SS Untersturmführer Baumhart asked me to reconnoiter the bushes 150 meters north of the road. He had recently noticed some movement there. Peter steered towards the bushes and wanted to drive around them at a distance. He circled the bushes in an ever-decreasing radius, but I didn't notice any enemy. Then Peter drove very close. I stood leaning out of the turret hatch. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a Russian officer jumped out. With a single leap, he was already standing on the slope in front of our vehicle and firing. Staggering back from his extraordinary agility, I fired my pistol and ducked. The vehicle stopped. It wasn't moving. I yelled at Peter. There was a loud bang in the gearbox. The armored vehicle jerked and started moving in fits and starts. Peter tried to throw a grenade into the bushes, but it immediately rolled under our armored vehicle, where it exploded. Peter never repeated such close combat tactics again. Upon arrival at the 1st Company of the 1st SS Infantry Regiment, we came under fire from Russian artillery, which did not dampen the battalion's fighting spirit in the least. The grenadiers under the command of Fritz Witt never showed any hesitation. This battalion was already a strong, fearless fire brigade. In a roadside ditch, I met an old comrade with whom I had trained in Jüterbog in 1934. Kwasowski, a tall guy, had suffered a serious leg injury. A shell fragment had shattered his foot. With his folding knife, this native of East Prussia made one last cut and separated the foot from the body. The relief arrived without delay. Soon, SS Hauptsturmführer Hempel was killed. He was a good friend of Gritek. We buried the dead man to the sound of Russian artillery fire. The farewell speeches were drowned out by the roar of engines. The highway was open again. Columns of German troops rolled eastward. We advanced on Zhytomyr and fought on the approaches to Kiev, together with the 13th and 14th Panzer Divisions. Then our battalion was replaced by a reconnaissance battalion of the Infantry Division and released for other tasks. While Kleist's 1st Tank Group advanced through Zhytomyr towards Kiev, units of the 6th Army attacked Russian forces near Oman, having previously taken Vinnytsia. Further south, the 17th German Army was advancing. The divisions of the 3rd Motorized Corps involved in the advance on Kiev were then replaced by units of the 6th Army and turned southeast toward Kirovograd and Kremenchuk. At about 3 o'clock in the morning on July 30th, we stopped in the southern suburbs of Zibermanovka and covered the right flank of our division, which was under attack. By 5 a.m., we had reached Leshchinovka, which was defended by large enemy forces. The 2nd Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion got stuck in a swamp on the approach to the village and was pinned down by heavy Russian artillery fire. The 1st Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion was also under heavy fire. Around noon, Russian troops attempted to break through to the east. Enemy tanks raced at full speed straight at the motorcyclists and tried to crush our anti-tank weapons. It was impossible for the motorcycle company to break out of the battle due to Russian artillery fire. During this fierce battle, SS Untersturmführer Baumhart, who commanded a platoon in the 2nd Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion, was killed. Company commander SS Hauptsturmführer Krass was wounded. SS Obersturmführer Speth took temporary command of the company. A shell fragment tore off the lower jaw of one of our youngest comrades, SS motorcyclist Guzman. Risking their own lives, his comrades evacuated him. a Russian company was captured in a surprise attack by several armored vehicles. The company had orders to secure passage across the bridge. On July 31st, the battalion came under the operational control of the 48th Motorized Corps, which was tasked with advancing to Novo Archangelsk and completing the encirclement of the Russians in the Oman pocket. We reached Novo Archangelsk at noon without a fight. This large village was located on the left bank of the small Sinyuka River, which flowed from north to south and was impassable for tanks due to its steep banks. As soon as we reached the first houses of the village, we came under heavy artillery fire from the west. To the northwest of the town, I noticed a German battery, several armored vehicles, and motorcycles moving away to the northeast. These German troops apparently mistook us for Russians. We tried, unsuccessfully, to contact this German unit with signal flares. However, their fire could not be stopped, and then they withdrew. As we later learned, it was the 16th Reconnaissance Battalion. It had broken away from the enemy in the wrong direction and, accordingly, forced us to work extra hard. In the village, small arms fire was opened on us, and we had to fight our way to the bridge. There, we found an abandoned armored car of the 16th Reconnaissance Battalion. The bridge itself was damaged by mines. Behind us, the 1st Battalion of the 1st SS Infantry Regiment had already reached Novo Archangelsk and captured the southeastern part of the village in battle. After that, I felt much calmer. We could rely on Fritz's wit. The 1st Battalion of the 1st SS Infantry Regiment and the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion joined forces. We always got along well with each other. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the village was entirely in our hands. However, apart from my armored vehicles, there were no other reserves available. When darkness fell, the Russians attacked the battalion's positions, advancing from the northeastern edge of the village with large infantry forces and 8 tanks. Our anti-tank guns opened fire directly. But what happened? The tanks were not bothered in the least. They continued to advance on the motorcyclists. The shells ricocheted off the armor of the Russian tanks. Thank God, the motorcyclists were among the houses and were thus able to take cover from the tanks. Russian infantry also wedged into our positions and pushed back our company. The tanks made a big impression on my soldiers. I hoped that this would not turn into a complete defeat. I thought that maybe our gun on the bridge would have better luck. I jumped into the assault gun and drove to the bridge, where I met Montag's platoon, which was about to take up position on the near bank of the river. I couldn't believe my eyes. Motorcycle companies were rushing to the bridge and wanted to cross to the opposite bank. A few words were enough to normalize the situation. The companies turned around and drove back the Russians who had already infiltrated. 4 Russian tanks fell victim to the assault gun and the 47mm anti-tank gun. At 4 o'clock in the morning, a massive infantry attack followed, which was overwhelmed by the fire of the motorcyclists. The Russian attacking troops entered the village along the stream from the south. However, the bridge guarded by my sappers was not in danger. At dawn, the Russian troops that had broken through were partly repelled and partly taken prisoner. All other attacks were also repelled with heavy losses to the enemy. The encirclement of the 6th and 12th Russian armies in the cauldron near Oman was tightening. From August 2nd, 6-barrel mortars and mortar batteries were used against them. From a small hill, I watched the movements of the enemy troops. Several columns of Russians with various weapons disappeared into the woods 5 kilometers from the positions of the 1st Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion. Obviously, the enemy wanted to make another attempt to break through to the east at nightfall. Disturbing artillery fire rained down on our entire battalion's sector. More and more columns of Russian troops disappeared into the forest. The The tall trees hid thousands of people. Infantry, cavalry, and artillery sought cover from observers in the shade of the trees. Didn't they understand that we could follow all their movements? The Russian officers were leading their soldiers and themselves to their deaths. These concentrated forces could not be allowed to attack. They had to be destroyed first. Otherwise, we would not be able to withstand these masses in the dark. They would overwhelm us and break through like water through a floodgate. And a hole would form in the Oman cauldron. All of the battalion's heavy weapons, a unit of 6-barrel mortars and a battery of mortars, were deployed to carry out the combat mission, to cover the forest area with concentrated fire. I reserved the right to personally give the order to open fire. At that point, 6-barrel mortars were still an unknown weapon to us. We had no idea how effective they were. The clock was ticking. I waited patiently for the most favorable moment. The stream of Russian soldiers had not yet dried up. The cauldron was so full that it was already beginning to overflow. The critical moment had come. There were signs of night falling. The outlines of the trees were becoming barely discernible. Everyone waited tensely for the order to open fire. Fire! And all hell broke loose. A terrible howl hung over us. The smoke trails of the rocket mines described an arc above our heads and disappeared among the dark trees. These mines flew incessantly with a whistle toward the enemy and exploded, bringing death and destruction. Heavy mortar shells roared through the air, adding to the hissing of the rocket-propelled mines. The forest literally split in half, like an anthill under the feet of a prehistoric monster. People and animals fought for their lives, but still ran toward death. Horses galloped madly away with carts and artillery, dying under the fire of machine guns and automatic cannons from our armored vehicles. The fading sun set below the horizon over this field of death. People were dying or becoming crippled. The animals awaited the final deadly blow. Thousands of people surrendered. I no longer wanted to see or hear anything. Such carnage filled me with revulsion. Russian and German doctors watched the human suffering with great pain. We saw Russian women in uniform for the first time. I admired their behavior. They often behaved with more dignity than the men. To ease the suffering of the wounded, female medical assistants worked through the night. After midnight, all hell broke loose. The cry, "Paratroopers!" echoed across the positions. And indeed, I saw large 4-engine transport planes above us, and then we heard the rustling of parachutes. All around us, parachutes were descending to the ground. The situation was extremely serious. We had no reserves. We waited for the parachutists to descend with our rifles and machine guns at the ready, but nothing happened. A few minutes later, the first report came in, and the first parachute was delivered. These were not parachutists. The enemy was dropping ammunition, food, and fuel for the surrounded troops. Towards evening, our sector was handed over to the 297th Infantry Division. The battalion was withdrawn to the center of the village. During the following night, a crowd of rear echelon personnel suddenly rushed across the bridge, ammunition carriers and carts. It was the enemy infantry that had penetrated the artillery park, where panic ensued. The battalion immediately launched a counterattack and captured several hundred Russian soldiers. The fighting for Oman was over. The 6th and 12th Russian armies were largely destroyed. Up to 140,000 prisoners, both army commanders, 317 tanks, and 858 guns fell into German hands. The first tank group was again released and sent to the southeast to cut off the retreat of the Russians, who were retreating before the front of the 11th Army. On August 9th, the battalion received orders to conduct reconnaissance in the direction of the village of Bobry. For many hours, we marched through a thick layer of dust and mud to the southeast. Russian cavalry followed us at a respectful distance, not giving us a chance to get rid of such annoying company. At dawn, on August 10th, I noticed a cloud from an explosion on the horizon, to the right of our direction of advance. It was an armored car of the 16th Reconnaissance Battalion that had hit an anti-tank mine. Soon, we captured a team of Russian miners. The team had been formed to dig up the recently laid mines. The prisoners were from the 12th Cavalry Division, which was retreating eastward under fire. I led the battalion straight east across tall grain and potato fields, then turned south. Suddenly, we found ourselves behind the enemy's rear guard. Our motorcyclists destroyed several armored vehicles, trucks, and anti-tank guns. Thick clouds of smoke rose straight into the sky. Pursuing the retreating Russians, the advance platoon stumbled upon field fortifications that were so well positioned that they were only noticed at the last moment. One of our best non-commissioned officers was killed in the battle. The always cheerful Bubi Buroze was killed while leading his platoon. The platoon commander, SS Untersturmführer Wawzinek, was wounded. The target of the 16th Panzer Division's offensive was the port of Nikolaev. We were tasked with covering the division's left flank from possible attacks from the east. General Huba led his division across the Ingul River and then advanced south along the eastern bank of the river. In doing so, he cut off the retreat route to the east for many Russian units. Upon reaching the bridge at Kiryanovka, our battalion came under heavy artillery fire from the southwest. This meant that the enemy was behind us and was trying to prevent us from crossing the Ingul. But this fire did not prevent us from accomplishing our task. Increasing the intervals, the vehicles sped across the bridge. There were no losses in either manpower or equipment. The 16th Tank Division advanced rapidly through the retreating Russian troops and reached the approaches to Nikolaev with its vanguard. We also advanced continuously, cutting off the retreating Russian units, and reached the village of Zaselia, which stretched far along the road to Novopoltavka. During the 5-day offensive, we found ourselves in critical situations many times and fought many battles with the retreating units of the Russian army. We were used to not fearing the enemy, but of course, we were beginning to respect the endless Russian expanses. 2 lakes bordered this long village to the west, and it was easy to defend from that side. The last Russian troops left Zaselia around noon, retreating to the east. They belonged to the 162nd Rifle and 5th Cavalry Divisions. Under the Bolsheviks, the church was used as a barn and a cinema. The staircase from the bell tower had obviously been used for firewood and burned in stoves. Red banners hung from the ceiling. Suddenly, a frail, toothless man approached us, introducing himself as an Orthodox priest. He asked permission to conduct a service. Tears streamed down the priest's wrinkled face as the villagers entered the modest room, and he read his first sermon in many years with a trembling voice. The old people listened to his words with reverence. The young people stood in the square in front of the church with curiosity, but also some confusion. At night, the sound of fierce fighting came from the west. It was the 16th Tank Division advancing on Nikolaev. At dawn, I climbed the bell tower and looked out over the typical rural landscape of southern Russia. Vast fields stretched in all directions, and a network of dusty country roads, like a spider's web, stretched deep into the black soil. Dust swirled along all the roads, and enemy planes took off and landed near the neighboring village of Novopetrovka. As expected, the Russians had surrounded our battalion. There was no need to explain what would happen if Nikolaev held out for a while longer and the enemy tried to encircle the flanks of the 16th Tank Division. The thick clouds of dust in the west and east spoke for themselves. It was going to be hot. The motorcycle companies advanced to positions on the outskirts of Zaselia, and they were just having their morning roll call when large enemy forces were spotted in the east. At the same time, an enemy column moved toward Zaselia from the west. The Russians had no idea that we had taken Zaselia yesterday, and so they walked straight into a trap set by our engineer platoon and several armored vehicles. The dam that separated the two lakes became the Russians' doom. Many enemy soldiers, who did not have time to resist or even fire a single shot, were taken prisoner. The bell tower became my command post. From there, I could observe the enemy's movements and take timely action. More and more Russians appeared from the direction of Shuvanka and disappeared into the swaying wheat field, only to turn around and launch their planned attack on Zaselia. I calmly watched the situation unfold, because there was a strip of field at least 400 meters wide approaching the village. Under such conditions, any enemy attack would be drowned in its own blood. Russian artillery batteries were taking up positions on the horizon. Mounted couriers galloped across the black earth. There were plenty of targets for our guns, but we had to conserve ammunition. Our lines of communication were endlessly long, and ammunition was truly precious. We waited for the right moment, when each shot would successfully do its bloody work. Small black dots moved toward us across the ripening fields. From time to time, the sun reflected off the shiny metal, sparkling brightly against the more even daylight. The dots were getting closer and closer. They no longer resembled ants. They were clearly Russian infantrymen. Their battle formations were excellent. They advanced in a widely dispersed formation. Groups of soldiers pulled anti-tank guns. Horses remained behind. I carefully assessed the situation, like a chess player, and prepared the weapons that would be most deadly to the enemy. The Russians advanced stubbornly, but cautiously. Not a single German soldier was visible on the outskirts of Zaselia. The village must have looked unoccupied to the Russians. Only reinforced platoons of motorcycle companies remained in position. All my other units were waiting for orders to attack north and south of the village. I wanted not only to repel the attack, but also to destroy the Russian military unit. That moment came at 11 o'clock in the morning. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. See you all soon.